Hi, I'm Sonya, and today I'm going to play a Prelude in D minor by Johann Sebastian Bach from his English Suite number 6. This video, however, is not only about this particular prelude, but using this work as an example, I'd like to talk about the genre of prelude in general. So, what is prelude? What comes to mind when you hear the word prelude in the context of piano classical music? Does Rachmaninoff come to mind, or do you perhaps think of Bach, maybe C major prelude, or maybe Chopin? I figured whatever is that we're thinking of, but we tend to think about prelude as this independent, standalone piece. And it wasn't always like that, right? As the name suggests, prelude was originally meant to introduce something. It would precede something that's more significant, that's more important. Imagine yourself a musician in 16th or 15th century, and you're about to play a concert, and people are gathering, and if you're anything like me, you're probably incredibly nervous at that point. And what's a better way to calm your nerves down than to just pick up your instrument and start playing? Play something quietly on the background without attracting too much attention to yourself, right? Just get the feel of an instrument, warm up your hands, see if the tuning is right. That was the role of the prelude at that time. Musicians would simply just warm up their fingers before the concert. And even earlier, you could trace the first prelude back to 15th century, I think, where organ players would introduce the singing in churches. Some of them were completely improvised and not even written down. None of the preludes that Bach wrote were actually meant to be independent works. Even his C major prelude that we used to hear independently, it's a part of a set of a prelude and fugue. Many composers, many of Bach's contemporaries or his predecessors were writing sets of preludes and fugues at that time. And the centerpiece of those prelude and fugue sets was a fugue. Bach wrote lots of preludes and fugues. He wrote 2 books of what's called a well-tempered clavier. Each book consists of 24 preludes and fugues. Not only he has written out all of his preludes in notation, nothing is left to improvisation, but also in terms of musical complexity, those preludes are equal counterparts to the fugue. There is nothing secondary about them. Take the C major prelude and fugue, for example. It is the prelude, right? Not the fugue. It's the prelude that made its way on the top of the list of piano iconic works, so to speak. Bach's contribution to the art of fugue is enormous, so it's very likely that his focus was also fugue when he was composing this set. It's just that, being the genius that he was, he simply could not write something that wasn't an extraordinary piece of art. It often happens when we look at work of giants of classical music that we see a so-called secondary genre, that blooms into a masterpiece in their hands. For example, before Paganini and Chopin, an etude was merely a study for students to improve their technique. It wasn't the brilliant firework that Chopin and Paganini made of them, the kind of an etude that we're used to hear in concert halls now. Prelude has gone through remarkable transformation, shaped by Bach and reinvented time and again by composers after him. Many of those composers followed suit and also wrote 24 preludes, one in each key, like Chopin, for example, and those preludes do not even have a fugue that follow them. They could be performed all by themselves, as well as in a cycle. Later, in the 20th century, the prelude becomes its own universe, a work so complete that it could be performed in a concert or as an encore after a concert or instead of a concert if needed to be. When Rachmaninoff puts his hand on a prelude, for example, see what becomes of it. So for now, let's return to Bach and the prelude the way it was during Bach's time. Another form of the time that would start off with a prelude would be a dance cycle. And Bach has explored that genre in great depth. He has numerous English suites, French suites, partitas, overtures. His English suites are written for harpsichord and all of them start off with a prelude. Those preludes somehow have this dancing quality to them, both in rhythm, reminding of this or another popular dance of that time, and also in the uplifting spirit. It's like as if musicians preparing the guests at dinner that dances are about to come. So this particular prelude, the D minor, is my favorite because of its complexity, so unlikely for a typical prelude of that time. It starts off with the slower part, kind of an introduction, almost sounding like an improvisation. And if Bach just ended it right there, it would have been its own independent little prelude. So instead, it's followed by a faster paced, more spirited, polyphonic section. We'll call it the main body of this prelude. And this main section could be in turn divided into several smaller sections. And if you just take the very first section in itself, again, it could be a complete prelude. It has all the themes introduced and developed and its own climax and its own conclusion in the end. It could have stood alone as independent prelude. So this section repeats in the very end, similar way to a sonata, which is much more complicated musical form. In between those two absolutely identical sections, there is a big one in the middle where all the themes taking us on a further journey away from the main key, with added drama of contrasting interluding episodes to frame each section. So in the complexity of form and from performing point of view, from the emotional intensity point of view, this prelude to me matches all the dances combined that follow it. There is nothing secondary, there is nothing introductory about it. To me, it's a centerpiece of this entire cycle. And yet, it leaves us with the feeling of wanting more in the end. And in that sense, it is a true prelude. I hope you'll agree with me when you listen to this piece to the end that this work makes both listener and the performer anticipate more, anticipate something different to come. Stay tuned for more from my piano room, and I'll see you in the next video. Enjoy the listening.